Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast from a disappointing Timberwolves collapse against the Miami Heat on Sunday night. We're going to break down what happened from the coaching issues, the rotation problems, the execution issues, and just some sloppy play overall for actually a lot of the game from the Wolves, but especially down the stretch. What the biggest problems were upcoming next. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. This is unfortunately not a victory Monday. It's a called a downtrodden post-game podcast after the Timberwolves. I've been calling it a collapse. I think that's probably the right word for what happened against the Heat on Sunday. And it's frustrating for a lot of reasons. Obviously they lost, but the manner in which they lost was extremely frustrating. I'll get into that a bit here in a minute. And I do think that this is one of the I'll say rare cases where we can actually hold Chris Finch accountable a little bit for some decision making down the stretch. And to be fair, Chris Finch was accountable to it in his post game press conference. So I want to get to that. Probably, I think what I'll do is we'll go from the end of the game, like we'll go end of game backward. I want to start with the end of the game in evaluating what happened here. So we'll get to all that here in a moment. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. You can find us on YouTube as well as wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder about the new newsletter as well over here at Locked On Wolves. And you can just sign up on lockedondaily.com and you'll be able to find the Locked On Wolves newsletter. It's the one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox every day. Again, lockedondaily.com to find the Locked On Wolves newsletter. All right. Let's talk about the biggest issues in this game, going backward to forward. That doesn't make sense. Starting at the end of the game. We'll say that. Going backward from the end of the game. The final possession of the game for the Wolves on offense when they were already down by a single point. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because they messed it up and we don't really know exactly what they were trying to do. The Timberwolves had their personnel on the floor. I actually was okay with the lineup that was on the floor for this. I'm talking about the offensive possession with like 7.8 left after they called a timeout, advanced the ball. And the group that was on the floor was the starters, but Nas instead of Rudy. Okay, so Nas Reid instead of Rudy, otherwise the starters. And Anthony Edwards was going to inbound the ball, and he stepped. You know how they'll step in front of the sideline, like I'm not ready to take the ball. I'm yelling out instructions, and then kind of step back, and then was like, oh, and then Randle started coming toward the sideline, like, all right, we're going to switch out here. But then Ant was basically like, never mind, took the ball from the referee, gets the ball inbound, and it ended up being a Mike Conley miss from the corner that I think missed short, and the Wolves couldn't get the rebound. And the Timberwolves, right after the final horn, Ant and I believe Conley and Chris Finch were all trying to talk to the officials saying, like, hey, we didn't want Ant to inbound the ball. My read on that is Ant shouldn't have taken the ball. Like, I think I'm pretty sure, like, I remember when I was in, like, middle school, I was taught, like, hey, if the ref tries to get you to inbound the ball from underneath the backboard, you know, like in some high school gyms, it's like a really bad, you know, like the distance underneath the backboard is not great. Like, don't take the ball underneath the backboard, right? Like, step out from underneath the backboard. Don't take the ball from the official until you're ready to inbound it. You know, worst case scenario is the ref drops it and starts counting. That's not going to happen at the NBA level, right? Don't take the ball if you're not ready to inbound it. That's on the Timberwolves. That's an execution problem. And Chris Finch actually said post-game in his press conference that he made a late change on the play call. Like, and by the way, this is a quick aside. I don't want to spend a lot of time on like addressing people that are trolling and people that are scapegoating Chris Finch for this game. There's blame to go around. That's what I'm doing. Like, Chris Finch deserves some blame for this, but Chris Finch is an incredible coach. He's one of the best. I don't know. This is a whole other topic, but what, 6, 8 coaches in the league? I mean, there's no question about that at this point. So for people like going beyond this game and making grander sweeping statements about Chris Finch, that's crazy. I love that Chris Finch was accountable in the post-game press conference. What do you want the coach to say? Your two options are admitting they made a mistake or arguing about the thing everybody else is already thinking. If a coach is defiant, people clown the coach for being defiant and saying, no, you're wrong, I was right, when clearly it didn't work out. If he's accountable, now that's a problem too. Like Chris Finch being accountable to what happened, like I thought it looked like just watching on TV that the play call was changed because Finch immediately, Conley was still arguing that he was in the shot motion on the take foul from the Heat, right? When they had the foul to give. Conley was arguing with the refs. They show Finch. Finch is calling a play immediately, but he changed it. And Finch said that in the postgame presser. He didn't have to say that because Ant would have gotten the blame. But Finch said, I changed the play. And he didn't say this, but I'm saying Ant's mistake was taking the ball. Ant should have just been like, nah, I'm going to let Randle come inbound it because coach changed the play and just left, right? Like just walked away, switched spots with Randle, get in the right spot on the floor. Instead, they were all discombobulated. McDaniels was shrugging his shoulders like nobody knew what was going on. And they ended up getting a decent look, but obviously Conley, will get into this, struggled a lot down the stretch, missed the shot. They don't get the rebound, game's over. So that was an execution problem. Chalk that one up to execution, mostly on Chris Finch, a little bit on Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle for not just figuring it out on the floor. Excuse me. Like just figure that out. Going backward again, go to the defensive possession. Wolves are up by 2. Right around 10 seconds. I think 9 seconds left. Okay. Actually, I've got it right here. I might as well get the exact right time. Exactly 9 seconds left. Okay. Chris Finch is going to send Nickeil Alexander-Walker's on the floor instead of Mike Conley. Okay, so it's starters minus Conley plus Alexander-Walker. And Chris Finch changes his mind after the Heat finish their subs after coming out of the timeout. And right before the ball gets inbounded, Finch decides to put Conley in for Gobert. And understandably, the thought process here is, look, they're all lining up near the timeline. They're probably going to try and shoot a 3 to win the game on the road. Like that's probably what they're going to do. Everyone on the Heat can shoot a 3, right? They've got Hero and Love and Duncan Robinson. Like Love's on the floor. Love hasn't played, for a while at this point in the game. Bam Adebayo is off the floor. The thought process is we're going to switch everything. They're going to shoot a 3. Well, instead they get a back cut from Nikola Jovic, cuts all the way toward the basket. The Timberwolves don't switch it. They don't pass it off. Nickeil Alexander-Walker's trailing it and fouls Jovic as he makes the layup, which of course, you can't fault Alexander-Walker for trying to block the shot in that situation, but it added insult to injury, if you will, because it meant it was a 3-point play that gave the Heat the lead instead of just tying the game. That is mostly a Finch problem and then an execution problem on the Wolves for not switching that. I think if it's a 3-point lead, yeah, keep Gobert off the floor. These guys aren't probably going to try and get with 9 seconds left. It's not enough time to play the foul game and get a 2, right? So with a 3-point lead, like actually the play before that, when McDaniels makes the offensive put back, they call the foul on, I think it was Highsmith, and then they end up Heat challenge. They take it away. They say it was more contact from Randle than Highsmith. If that had stood and it was a 3-point game, say McDaniels makes the free throw, then yeah, Gobert should be off the floor. But in a 2-point game, you have to assume that there's a real possibility they go for the tie, especially once you take Gobert off the floor. Now, I don't think the Heat changed their play call, but it's certainly like if Gobert's in the game. But see, here's the thing. If Gobert's in the game, he's probably out near the perimeter anyway, and he'd have to backpedal toward the rim. But still, Jovic doesn't just waltz to the rim, or at least have the confidence to do so when Gobert's in the game. So that, to me, is on Chris Finch. It's a 2-point game, not a 3-point game. Gobert should have been in the game in that situation. And also, Gobert's not half bad at defending on the perimeter. We saw him shut down a couple of different Heat players. Adebayo, which is obviously different, shutting down Adebayo off the dribble versus shutting down like a Tyler Hero or, somebody else that would have the ball, Terry Rozier on the perimeter. But still, Gobert's not half bad at switching on the perimeter either if you need to. So I think not having Gobert in the game there was a mistake. The sub and how it was defended were both mistakes. Again, the sub on Finch, how it was defended, I guess, on the players on the floor for not understanding that they needed to switch that. I want to hit on like one other Chris Finch thing, one other coaching thing, but it's within the context of the collapse over the final 8 minutes. Because if you go back, like I knew it was bad in real time, but if you go back and look at the play-by-play, that's a rough 8 minutes. for how this thing finished for Minnesota. And it was clouded a little bit because like there were a couple makes in there, like Randle had a nice make and McDaniels had the putback, and it's like, all right, they're going to hang on and win this thing. But man, you go back to like the 4-minute mark and possession by possession, it's rough stuff. So we're going to do that a little bit here. That's just what we got to do after a loss. We'll talk a little bit about how great the third quarter was, the second half of the third quarter, and what that run looked like for Minnesota, the lineups that are on the floor there. And we'll get to studs and duds here toward the end. So that's what we'll do for the rest of the show today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started again, $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. There were lots of good NFL bets on the board for Sunday. The Wolves were, I think, 8.5-point favorites headed into the Heat game. No Jimmy Butler on Sunday. I didn't even talk about that in the first segment. No Jimmy Butler. They still end up losing to the Heat. They're, I think, 7.5-point favorites as of when I looked earlier today against Portland on Tuesday, and 6.5-point favorites already for Wednesday night's second game of a back-to-back. It's hard to beat a team 3 times in 5 days, but that's what the Wolves will try and do with the Blazers. Go check that out. Go check out adjusted win totals over at FanDuel too. Again, get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get the rest of the close of this game out of the way here. So with 4 minutes to play, 4.5 minutes. And let's do this. Anthony Edwards hits a 3 at the 4:59 mark. Okay, they're up 8. The Timberwolves get a rebound after Tyler Hero forces a shot on the other end and misses it. So the Wolves have the ball up 8 with 4:20 left. Ant tries a weird pull-up shot that was not necessary. And in the moment, I actually think on the call, Michael Grady even said something like, bad shot selection, the Wolves pay for it, because Hero makes a 3 immediately on the other end. Okay, so that's where it starts. Ant has a bad shot attempt. Hero makes a 3. Gobert checks into the game at the 4-minute mark. So now you've got the starters on the floor, except for Nickeil Alexander-Walker's on the floor instead of Conley. Gobert comes in, DiVincenzo sits with 4 minutes to play. Gobert immediately turns the ball over. Immediately. And Anthony Edwards gets called for a clear path foul. Okay? Clear path foul. Highsmith makes one shot, one of the free throws. The Heat get the offensive rebound, and that leads to the Jaden McDaniels foul in the corner on the shot. And then the Wolves challenge it because it was in front of Chris Finch, and he was adamant that he did ask the assistant coaches. They said challenge it. Yes, it was a weak call, but letter of the law, it was absolutely a foul, and it was correct that it stood. Okay? So let me recap what just happened. The Wolves are up 8 with 4:15 to play. Edwards forces a tough, one of the few mid-range jumpers he shot all season. Hero hits a 3. Gobert checks in, turns it over. Edwards commits a take foul. Clear path, an obvious one. Now you go from up 5 to up 4. The Heat get the possession after the clear path free throws. They make 1 of 2, get the possession. McDaniels closes out recklessly to Hero, fouls him in the corner. He makes all 3 free throws. Now it's a 1-point game. In 45 seconds, this has happened. Alexander Walker makes a nice shot on the other side. They go back and forth a little bit. Mixed in there, Randle misses a 4 shot. Conley comes back in the game at the 2.5-minute mark. We'll talk more about that. Randle misses a pull-up jumper at the end of the, I guess it was at the end of the shot clock, but a forced, just a bad offensive possession. And Randle kind of had to pull the trigger. It's not necessarily a Randle, but it was he misses it, right? So they're still up 3. Now under 2 minutes to play, Jovic scores after another Anthony Edwards turnover. Conley misses another 3. Randle hits a putback. They're up 3 now with a minute to play. The Heat get fouled. I think it was it was off the rebound where Ant misses Jovic misses a potential game time 3-pointer from the corner, and Ant misses a box out. And this is actually not completely on Ant. Gobert had to leave the paint to contest the 3. It was the right play. Jaden McDaniels actually missed a rotation to come down and rebound. So Ant was basically trying to box out 2 guys, didn't box out either of them. And because of the angle of the rebound, Highsmith grabbed it, and Ant kind of frustration fouled him, trying to tie him up. And it was really more unfortunate bounce and no box out from Ant, no crash, no rotation down by McDaniels. So Ant was taking on two guys. Gobert didn't do anything wrong on that play. He did what he was supposed to do. But McDaniels kind of floated. Ant was a little bit lazy, and that led to more free throws. Highsmith hits one. Now it's a 2-point game. Conley turns it over on the other side of the floor. Another Mike Conley mistake. Rozier gets fouled by McDaniels, makes both free throws. You have a tie game. On the other end, the Timberwolves, after a timeout, have a very lazy offensive, or lazy is not the right word, a stagnant offensive possession where they pass the ball around the perimeter. Ant tries to penetrate. The Heat load up with three guys on that side of the floor. They swing it back to the other side. It comes back to Ant. They load up again. So you've got three on Ant's side of the floor, two guarding, three Wolves on the other side of the floor. The Wolves didn't even isolate Ant correctly initially. And the ball gets to Conley. And instead of Conley kicking it to McDaniels, who's wide open in the corner, he shoots a three from, 3-4 feet outside the arc, which frankly, I'd rather have Conley shoot that than McDaniels shoot a corner three in that spot. He misses it. McDaniels does a great job crashing from the corner, gets the rebound, makes the shot. Ultimately, they take off the foul that I mentioned earlier, and it's a 2-point lead for Minnesota, and then everything we already talked about takes place, okay? So you go back through those final 8 minutes, and I don't normally go blow by blow, but this was so bad of, like, the only good possessions in there were a Randle offensive rebound and one Nikhil shot that he made in the paint. That was a pretty good drive. Otherwise, you have forced mid-range from Ant, turnover by Rudy, turnover by Conley, another forced three by Conley, another bad shot by Ant. You have the end of shot clock heave from Randle, and then you have the missed three by Conley that leads the rebound from McDaniels. Just a really, really bad stretch of offensive possessions, and then lazy rebounding and fouling on the other end of the floor to compound all the issues they're having on offense. It was really an epic collapse that took everybody on the floor. Like, the only guy that I'm trying to think of who played, I guess Alexander Walker got taken out with 2.5 minutes left. I guess he had the foul at the end on Jovic. Like, everybody that played in those final 4 minutes did something bad, like contributed in a negative way to the close in this game. Conley and Ant were the most glaring mistakes. I mean, Ant had, 5 bad mistakes that I just listed. Conley had like 3, and then he misses the shots at the end anyway, or in addition to that. Finch had some bad moments, and actually now's the right time to talk about the rotation stuff. Alexander Walker was on the floor until the 2.5 minute mark, and DiVincenzo didn't play the last 4 minutes. It was interesting because they were playing so well with Conley on the bench, and I understand it's Chris Finch is hardly the first coach to go with his starters, to go with his veteran point guard down the stretch to close the game. He's not the first guy to do that. Not at all. But in this game in particular, it seemed really weird because both DiVincenzo and Nickeil Alexander-Walker were fantastic in this game. They were significantly better than Conley. I mean, Conley had a rough game. Conley was a minus 16 in 24 minutes in this game. Now, I want to be fair. I'm not saying Conley's cooked. I'm not saying Conley should play way less. He only played 24 minutes in this game. I'm not saying Dillingham should play instead of Conley. Chris Finch is strategically, this is a topic I'll cover, I think, on tomorrow's show. There's a rhyme and reason to this. Chris Finch wants these guys to play together as much as they can because it's going to matter later this season. Rob Dillingham's going to get his shot. Terrence Shannon's going to get his shot. Josh Minot's going to get more of a shot. Like, I understand why Chris Finch is doing things this way. And I'm not advocating at all. This isn't an advocate for Rob Dillingham soapbox situation. I'm just saying down the stretch, DiVincenzo or Alexander Walker would have been a better choice than Mike Conley. I don't have a huge problem with who was on the floor for the final offensive possession. As I said earlier, like in that situation, you could argue DiVincenzo, but he'd been sitting for, I don't know, probably 10, 12, 15 minutes in real time, 4 minutes of game time. I understand why Conley's on the floor. Like Nikhil's turned into a good 3-point shooter, but Conley's generally more tried and true. Well, not generally, he is, right? Given his track record. Now Conley was 0 for 5 from 3 in this game. Nikhil was 2 for 3. DiVincenzo was only 2 for 7, but he had a really well-rounded, solid game. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. This was just I thought, and Chris Finch, again, accepted responsibility in the post-game presser that he could have done the rotations differently in this game. In fact, let's go back to something that turned out really well. In the third quarter, the Wolves were turning the ball over like nobody's business for the first half of the third quarter. Like the whole first half, the problem was just missed shots. Lots of shots in and out. a bit of shot selection issues, but like just bad shooting. The Wolves were actually pretty good everywhere else. They had, they led in most of the key categories at halftime. They just didn't shoot the ball well and make their shots. The third quarter was turnover city for both teams, really, but the Wolves just a cavalcade of turnovers. Like Randle had some bad passes in there. We had, Ant's shot selection. Randle had 2-3 bad passes. It was just a really rough stretch. And Naz comes in with the Wolves down 7 at about the 5.5 minute mark. And all of a sudden, right when Naz comes in, it's just a Rudy flurry. Like Rudy blocks Jaquez at the rim, and then he gets an and one on the other end. And then Rudy gets an offensive rebound that kept the possession alive that then led to a Jaden dunk. And now the Wolves are only down 2. And then Naz hits a 3, and the Wolves take a lead. And then the Wolves have the lead for a while. DiVincenzo hits a 3, actually a couple of 3s. The Wolves are up 8 points at that point in time. And then the Wolves kind of do the thing where Rudy comes back in, I think, to start the fourth in place of, Randle comes back in place of Rudy. So then it's Naz and Randle. You saw a bit of Jaden at the 4 as well, which you've seen more of here in recent games. But that stretch with that particular lineup, again, it was after Randle left the game, Naz came in. So it was, and Conley was off the floor too. So it was DiVincenzo and Ant in the backcourt with McDaniels, Reid, and Gobert in the front court. And they went on like a 15-0 run. I think Alexander Walker checked in at some point during that stretch in the third quarter, but it was at least a 12-0, 15-0 run for that lineup. And it was after Naz checked in, Rudy did a lot of it, and then Naz and DiVincenzo each kind of did their part. So like that was great. Like that was really good. It wasn't that far outside of what their normal rotation was, but timing wise, it worked out. They went from a 7-point deficit to an 8-point lead very quickly. And then the fourth quarter, it was just, let me hit the reset button because this is what NBA teams do is like, we'll just put our starters back in. And that's, he waited a little bit longer until the 2.5 minute mark to take Alexander Walker out, but he should have stayed in. He should have stayed in a little bit longer there at the end. All right, let's close by talking individual studs and duds. That's what we'll do here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Use Prize Picks Game Time Picks. They'll curate the selection for you to make it easier to save more on the things that you enjoy seeing the most. That includes sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Plus, their all-in pricing feature. If you toggle it on, you'll be able to see your total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And they have, of course, their lowest price guarantee, which means that Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you think you find a better price somewhere else. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONWolves for Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Okay, let's talk individual studs and duds, and we'll set up the rest of the week here for you as well. So stud-wise, we talked a lot of negative in this game. Actually, studs are a little bit harder in this one. There was some pretty bad play from a lot of different guys. I'm going to go Naz. Naz was probably the best player on the floor for Minnesota overall, and he also played the least amount of minutes of anybody that played. See my Chris Finch comments earlier in the show. This was not Chris Finch's best night. It doesn't mean he's a bad coach. It can, this wasn't Ant's best night either. It doesn't mean he's a bad player, right? This can happen. Naz was great in this game. 15 points on 11 shots, 5 of 11, 4 of 7 outside the arc. He hit the 3 that put them ahead in the third quarter. 3 rebounds, 2 assists, only 1 turnover in 23 minutes. I thought he played extremely well. Now, you'd love to see him grab more than 3 rebounds in 23 minutes. I also don't know who you're playing less. I mean, Gobert was, I thought, effective overall in this game. Randle wasn't great, but the Wolves needed offense, and he had a couple of nice offensive possessions. So I don't know. It's all that to say, Naz had a good game. My second stud is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. 12 points on 6 shots for Nickeil. Hard to be more efficient than that. 2 of 3 on threes, 5 of 6 overall. 3 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal, 1 block, no turnovers in 26 minutes for Nikhil. And he was great. He shouldn't have been taken off the floor at the 2.5-minute mark in the fourth quarter, as we've addressed. He should have been out there. I thought he played very well. And my third stud, you better believe we're going all bench here today. I'm going Donte DiVincenzo, 8 points, 6 rebounds, 4 steals, 2 assists, 1 block for Donte. He was one of only 4 Timberwolves to have a positive plus-minus in a 1-point loss. 3 of 9 shooting, 2 of 7 on 3. So he was 1 of 2 on 2s, 2 of 7 on 3s. And again, 6 rebounds. Like, the dude tied for second on the team in rebounding in this game. He was everywhere. He had a massive offensive rebound that led to, I can't remember, it was in the fourth quarter. It was like mid-fourth quarter, right before he checked out. He had a huge offensive rebound. It actually might have led to an and 3. DiVincenzo was fantastic in this game. And he absolutely, that would have been my move. Like, if you want to rotate through Conley, DiVincenzo, and Alexander Walker in the final few minutes, fine. Just however you want to handle that. But DiVincenzo, gives you the most offensive punch and versatility of the 3 of them. And even if Conley's your best catch and shoot guy, I think, given your evidence this year and also what DiVincenzo did last year, not too shabby, north of 40%, third in the league in 3-pointers made and attempted, he can give you that same catch and shoot ability out there. Right. So I don't be shocked if that starts to shift late game situations, if we see more DiVincenzo. And we have seen him in crunch time before, but the typical rhythm for Finch is he lets DiVincenzo carry it into the 3-4 minute mark, and then Conley comes back into the game. So they're both kind of playing those crunch time minutes, but don't be shocked if at some point, Finch decides to stick with DiVincenzo in one of these situations. So yeah, all 3 studs are the bench players. Duds, Mike Conley. Not a whole lot more to say there. 4 points on 9 shots, 2 of 9, 0 of 5 outside the arc for Mike. 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and 4 turnovers. Very uncharacteristic for him to have 4 turnovers and only 3 assists in a game. Another dud, man, this is tough because nobody was scoring, so it's hard to blame Ant and Randle for getting a bit trigger happy in this game. I'm going to combine them and give them each half of a dud. I'm breaking my own rules a little bit here. I don't know. I'm just adjusting my own rules. So Conley gets a full dud in this game. Ant and Randle split the other one. They combined to go 5 of 20 outside the arc. Not great. They combined to only attempt 7 free throws, which is, you'd like to see that number be a bit higher. They combined to, yes, have 12 assists, but have 10 turnovers. Ant had 6 turnovers. Randle had 4 turnovers. Randle had 17 points on 16 shots. Not efficient. Edwards had 22 points on 24 shots, even less efficient. Ant had his first bad high-volume shooting night of the season from deep. He was 4 of 14 on 3s. He was only 4 of 10 on 2s. He forced a couple of bad mid-range attempts. We talked about one of those earlier, but there were at least 2 attempts that it was like, wait a minute, this looks like last year's Ant, but he's not making these mid-range. Tried to go glass once, I think. He, off of an offensive rebound, he tried to, that bad shot that led to the, it kind of spurred this Heat run that led to the Hero 3 that cut this to a 5-point game with 3.5 minutes to play. Just not great execution from Ant. Bad decision making. We talked about the lack of boxing out. I thought the defensive, on-ball intensity was there like normal. It was just missed rotations, lack of rebounding in these big moments, and bad decision making offensively. And it's going to happen. It is. This game is simultaneously hey, don't go back and look at last year's schedule and find some of the terrible losses they had against bad teams. And the Heat are going to be a decent team. They're not as good as the Wolves. They were missing their best player. I get it. However, they've got arguably the best coach in the league, one of the top 3 or 4 coaches for sure in Eric Spoelstra. They still had the rest of their roster. It's not the worst loss ever. It's frustrating because it was so winnable. And both teams played poorly. Both teams were sloppy. And all the Heat did was make slightly less mistakes down the stretch than Minnesota. And the Timberwolves couldn't get out of their own way. It's frustrating because it was so winnable. And this is also one of those, you could go back. You could do this any game. But, go back through. And there was a defensive rebound that Conley and Randle, ran into each other. And the ball goes out of bounds. There was, obviously the McDaniels foul in the corner. There were just a handful of these weird plays that happened in this game, that sloppy, careless things that never should have happened. The Wolves shot the ball terribly. We talked about that. A lot of it was in the first half. They were 29% from 3. They attempted only 13 free throws in this game. They had 9 less free throw attempts and 5 less free throw makes than Miami. Thankfully, Miami didn't shoot it great from the line. And the Wolves turned it over 19 times. Miami turned it over 22 times, but the Wolves didn't take advantage of the Miami turnovers. They were beaten fast break points 26-4 in this game. They didn't even get a chance to get to all that stuff. But, like, again, I mean, points off turnovers, like, they did okay forcing turnovers. Defensively, they were decent for stretches. They finally made free throws when they got to the line. They just didn't get there enough. They rebounded the ball really well on both ends of the floor. It was just the late game execution stuff and some of the other problems along the way. The missed shots in the first half, the turnovers in the third quarter is really what kind of set this thing up to be a close game late. And then the late game execution was just simply non-existent for the Wolves. All right. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to take a half step back. We haven't done this in about a week, and look at kind of some fun with numbers, small sample size stuff. Maybe some of the numbers won't be quite as fun. We'll talk about how good the offense had been until the Miami game. And we'll take a peek ahead at the schedule too on Tuesday's show. The rest of this week, it's back-to-back in Portland. 2 straight games in Portland against those same Blazers on Tuesday and Wednesday, both 9 p.m. Central tips. Tuesday is the first game of the NBA Cup for the Wolves, by the way. And then Friday, they're at Sacramento, also an NBA Cup game. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday this week. Late nights, and then the Wolves will play a matinee back at Target Center. It's weird. It's a 1-game homestand for a matinee on Sunday against the Suns, a rematch of the first round playoff series. So that's what the next week looks like. It'd be real nice to win both those games in Portland. It'd be a very positive thing to be able to pick up a couple more wins and be at 8-4 going into that Sacramento game on Friday night, excuse me. All right. That's all we got for you today here on the show. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder about the newsletter. Go subscribe at LockedOnDaily.com. It's your one-stop for Ultimate Team and League coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.